These are the movies that my dad took on the trip in 1960, August of 1960. I went with the last vacation trip I took with the family after I graduated from high school. We went out west to the Mount Rushmore, across the Badlands in Dakota, and then up to Yellowstone National Park. Spent some time up there, and then from there over to Idaho, down towards Colorado, through western Colorado and southern Colorado, and stopping at Mesa Verde, and then Garden of the Gods, and then on back home. When I was young, my folks always took a vacation somewhere every year, and it was either out west somewhere. Usually we would do that one year, and then we would take trips down in the south to visit family that lived in the Carolinas and along the coast, and Wilmington, North Carolina, and places like that. So we were always going somewhere every year. It was like every other year. This was like I say, it was the last trip that we took, or that I took with the family. Actually, until we moved to California in 1963, after Gladys and I were married, and then we all moved and traveled through Colorado and Utah and Arizona and into California. But these pictures here would be in the Badlands in the Dakotas. Dad they had bought a pop-up tent trailer, and wasn't the same as the modern ones. It actually was a trailer you unfolded, and then you actually set a tent up on top of it. But it was small and had plenty of sleeping space after it was put up. When I was a lot younger, we camped most of the time. It was a way they could afford to travel, and they really enjoyed traveling, particularly out west. Um, Starting in, well, I remember Dad, they bought a 1950 Chevy, and Dad took the rear seats out and built a bed in the back so that we could sleep there, and we had a little pup tent that Carl and I usually slept in. But we we did a lot of traveling through the Rockies. Remember going there a couple of times. Um, One trip we traveled through New Mexico and Arizona. It was we met my cousin Will and his family in Clovis, New Mexico, and then we traveled with them on across New Mexico, Arizona. Spent a couple of days at the Grand Canyon. We went on up through Utah, and then back through Colorado and back home. And Will went on to spend about another month in California and on in the West. Dad usually just had 2 weeks vacation, so that limited how much time we could spend. One other thing I remember he did, even though we usually had new cars or almost new cars, he worked on the railroad, and he had passes, was able to get a pass, and he would get a trip pass once a year, and he would get the pass in case anything happened that we had to get back home. We could ride the train. And there's everybody at Mount Rushmore. Dad's carrying Lucy. And Mom with Jim, Lucy, and Kitty. I'm not sure exactly where this is, but it was somewhere we camped between Mount Rushmore and Yellowstone. It was our we had a dad had a '59 Ford station wagon, and that's our tent trailer. Carl walking back by the trailer. I looked like I was sitting behind the wheel for some reason. Dad did let me drive some on that trip. I'd was a relatively new driver, and but he did trust me on part of the trip. I remember a couple of times where he took the wheel away from me when we were in a narrow area. Yeah, and some little western town. Always seemed a little different to us because being from the east, western towns were spread out and wide streets and a lot of room. And most of the eastern towns and cities were pretty congested. Yeah, Dad particularly loved the western states. During the war, he was stationed for a while in Clovis, New Mexico, and I think that's the reason he liked going back out to the west, and probably part of why we eventually moved there. And another little western town, probably somewhere on our way to Yellowstone. How we're getting back in the mountains again. I remember on one steep mountain road somewhere, there was a car trying to tow a small travel trailer, and the guy had burned the clutch out in it, and he couldn't get it moving. And traffic had backed up behind him, and a bunch of us got out, and we tried to help push him to get him started, but eventually all we could do is just help him get over to the edge of the road where he would eventually have to have somebody tow it. And this is Yellowstone now. This was August, but the day before we got there, they had about 6 to 8 inches of snow, and so snow was early, and there are the bears. Bears were everywhere. Yes, I remember it was warm enough, but they had they had quite a bit of snow the day before, and kind of unusual for us being in the middle of August. That's Yellowstone Lake. It's mom and dad. There was a little beach there. Remember, there were a few other cars stopped there, people going down to the beach. Remember camping in the park. Um, there were bears everywhere, and they had uh, cabinets or cases made out of concrete with a steel door. You were supposed to put your food, any food, in those to, because that's what the bears were looking for was food. And I remember seeing a somebody's camp, little trailer, a little camp trailer that they apparently had food in, and the bear was tearing it apart. A bunch of people eventually scared it away through throwing rocks at it. But the people were warned not to keep food in your tent or your camper, and that's what the concrete bunkers were for. And it's one of the hot springs or the pools are all over Yellowstone. And of course, this is Old Faithful geyser. We had to get a shot of that. And I suppose just like any other tourist to Yellowstone. And just more scenes out across the mountains. Probably leaving Yellowstone, headed into Idaho by then. Seeing the snow in Yellowstone reminded me of probably the first trip I remember to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and again it would have been in the summertime, and we were up in the mountains somewhere where the snowpack was still probably 4 or 5 feet deep, and it was like I say, the middle of the summertime. And Mom out taking pictures somewhere. You know, they're still in the mountains. Well, we pretty much drove through the Rockies going from Idaho and Colorado, or Yellowstone down to Colorado. Somebody going across there, but that's not one of us, I don't believe. And Dad probably spotted the train there, on display, steam engine, since he was a railroader. I think now we're climbing up into Mesa Verde in western Colorado. That was a long, steep climb, a lot of switchbacks. And I kind of remember Carl was, yeah, this is Mesa Verde. Carl was pretty squeamish about driving on steep mountain roads like that. Matter of fact, all his life, and he didn't like to cross bridges or any high, didn't like to go up in high buildings, things like that. I kind of remember when we were coming down out of Mesa Verde. There's Carl and Jim and Kitty, and one of the ruins or what dwellings, whatever they called them. There were people at that time, at least, were able to walk around on and you know, see it close up. Don't know whether they still have it open like that or not. There were a number of tours that one that we went on through one of those cliff dwellings. Might have been this one even, where they led you down through it and told you, gave a little guided tour of the different rooms and what they were for. Mesa Verde was a pretty fascinating place with the different cultures that had lived there over the thousands of years. I think this is from when we were taking the tour down through the, the cliff dwellings. Yeah, in fact, there's a crowd of people. We stopped there again in 1963 on our way to California, and so went through the same areas. At that time, they had a campground up in the park. I don't know that they have that open anymore, but we were able to camp right at the near where these cliff dwellings and various types of structures were. And this is a view out over the valley in Colorado as you're coming down out of the mountain on Mesa Verde. This is one of the areas probably where Carl got excited when I said, let's take a shortcut across the one of the switchbacks. And back down in the valley in probably in western Colorado. And another little western town, this time somewhere in Colorado. And this, I believe, we're going into the Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. And again, another place we visited on our trip to California in 1963. Of course, we were going the other direction then. We were headed west through here. I don't remember the name of that. I think it was called Steamboat Rock or something like that. Yeah, and there's a picture of the station wagon and the trailer. Mom and Dad and Kitty, Jim, and Lucy were down there. Carl and I climbed up on one of these rocks, not quite as high as that one, but you can see we were pretty high up where we climbed up to take those movies. They didn't climb up the sheer side. They had a trail that went up there. And now we're headed out of Colorado. I think we're getting close to Kansas. And from here on, it got pretty flat and just kind of flat and boring, I guess. But there was interesting things to see in Kansas, but not like the mountains.